What's going on, folks? Ted from Nerd Immersion here, and I'm here with my good friend Sarah, who you may recognize from our various con-related videos, although we are not at a convention, unfortunately, right now.
I'm also not a blonde right now.
That's true. No, I mean, they've seen you when you're not a blonde, but
That's fair.
anyway, we're here to talk about, so we were just having, and we had an impromptu just chat about spells and stuff that's going on in the general space with, obviously, there's been a lot of news in the WotC space, and in kind of walking through some discussions, I think we figured out the crux of the counterspell change, and it actually
hmm
may fix what most people have said is the biggest issue, in my opinion, or one of the biggest issues.
That is the kindest way to represent our conversation, Ted, because it was literally me getting a comment from a friend on one of my videos today, and then double checking with you
Yeah, I mean,
that I was fact checking myself, which everybody out there should do.
correct.
But I do have the permission from my friend to share this. So for everyone listening at home, this is the thing that was posed to me in a comment on a video today. Interesting tidbit. Due to the new one spell slot per turn rule for spell casting, you can no longer use Counterspell on your turn to protect your own action cast spell. Action Fireball, get countered, use my reaction to counter their Counterspell. Fireball goes boom, legit in 2014, not in 2024. Which, if you don't know what monster stat blocks look like, had us both scratching our heads.
Yeah, so I mean, and to be honest, this crux, the crux of this
hmm
question, still we don't know the answer truly.
It's fair.
About this
Yeah.
turn-based mechanics, right? Because the way things are written now is one spell slot or one spell with a slot per turn, right? For you to cast. In the
Correct.
fireball instance, Sara casts fireball at me, I counterspell her. Can she counterspell me back? In 2014 you could. But if it's limited to slots, and this is something honestly we're just gonna have to wait till we get like a sage advice or some final ruling. But
hmm
to Sarah's point, we have the Green Dragon stat block. This was posted for free. Somebody posted it on the internet. I don't know if they were supposed to post it, but they did. And you could just search 2024 Green Dragon stat block. You can see it on screen here, although the text is a little small. And what's worth noting is, do you all remember when they made all the changes to Monsters of the Multiverse and a lot of people got upset because of the way they changed spellcasting? And if you recall, we were actually just looking at some stat blocks not that
hmm
long ago. Older stat blocks had first level, second level, third level, fourth level, and it spelled out every level of spell and how many slots that creature had, and then told you like they have four first level slots and they would list a couple of spells, and you as the DM would have the opportunity to just pick and choose, fundamentally replicating a character, right? And they changed that, and I think I've come around on the spell
hmm
slot changes, and the reason they've done that, I think, is to lessen the DM's mental load, right? Because if you're looking at that big
Yeah.
list
You
and
have enough that you have to track in the middle of combat, and honestly, tracking spell slots. It's the reason why I don't put a lot of casters up against my party. I don't want to deal with it.
so do you prefer this newer change where it's like a list of at will spells and then a couple ones that are per day each?
I think obviously I'm going to have to get a group together and test it out in the real world, but
Hmm.
on paper, the less I have to like mentally prepare and mentally physically track during a session, the better, in my opinion. Especially like I have the added layer of like having to deal with a VTT on
Right.
top of things, which is constantly freezes on me and glitches out. Which I love you, Foundry, but sometimes you're hard to use.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So if I don't have to have a little checkbox that I also have to go and find on the character sheet to check off to remember how many times I've used something, yeah, it's less of a mental load. I'm all for that. And with the way that they've kind of parsed it out, especially in this stat block, I think
Hmm.
it leads you into some more interesting scenarios that make monsters feel scarier. Which we were talking about some scenarios that just felt plain mean, but I would be
Mm,
so much it would be so much fun to run as a GM.
sure. Yeah, and basically, again, if you're familiar with the newer stat blocks, it's a number of at will spells, which for most
Hmm.
lower level creatures, it's just cantrips, right? Because those are at will.
Yep.
And then a list of X number of days each, and it'll list maybe one, maybe two spells. And our good friend the Green Dragon has a couple of once per day each and a couple of twice per day each spells, and then at will spells. Now, what kind of just was like a light bulb moment for me, and Sarah, if you would please read us
Hmm.
the new counterspell wording, if you would.
I would love to. I have my textbook right here. I came prepared.
Thank you.
Uh, you attempt to interrupt a creature in the process of casting a spell. The creature makes a Constitution saving throw. On a failed save, the spell dissipates with no effect, and the action, bonus action, or reaction used to cast it is wasted. If that spell was cast with a spell slot, the slot isn't expended.
Now, the big thing that I've seen many, many comments about is this is just a delay, right? As
Hmm.
written. Presuming, and this is the thing that I think a lot of people are thinking in the mindset of player versus player. You've got
Yep.
counterspell, I've got counterspell. To use the critical role example, I'm going to teleport away with my teleport spell. And you say counterspell. And you beat me. I don't get to leave this turn. But I didn't
Hmm.
spend my spell slot, so I'm just going to try again next turn. And then it becomes a war of attrition. If I'm trying to teleport out and I can survive the damage you're throwing my way, the limitation now becomes how many slots do you have to throw at me? And if you run out, then I can get out scot free, no problem. Or maybe I pass the save and I can do it, this con save. But if we look at our new Green Dragon stat block, you'll notice, again, as we discussed, number of days each. And can you read me that last line of Counterspell one more time, Sarah?
If that spell was cast with a spell slot, the slot is not expended.
If we look at all of our new monster stat blocks, they don't have spell slots, folks. They have usages per day.
Hmm.
So, if our green dragon goes to cast Cloud Kill at you and you counterspell it and it fails its con save, guess what? Its usage of Cloud Kill is gone. That's how they're managing this because
Hmm.
we all think in the mindset of player versus player with spell slots. Monsters no longer have spell slots anymore. So Counterspell works perfectly against the monsters we're facing. And this is a long discussion Sarah and I had at the start of this is we can't fundamentally discuss balance of
Hmm.
2024. We have a third of the picture here,
Yeah.
right? It's February. We're getting the monster manual.
Hmm.
Like every balanced conversation to some degree versus enemy creatures is pointless because they could, as we saw with this stat block, and even realistically, if we thought about it in terms of even the more recent stat blocks, everything's changing. We can't balance what we're fighting against. We're living in a world of new heroes fighting old monsters.
Hmm. Yeah, and correct me if I'm wrong, but this is the only higher level CR stat block we have out there. I don't think we saw another one at the press event when we were at Gen Con. I think
And,
this was the only high CR one we saw. So
and we
someone
weren't even
brought up an
supposed to post it. So somebody did.
yeah. So whoever you are, thanks. You just gave us a piece of the puzzle, but also don't do that.
Yeah.
Um
I think we've seen a
but
spider maybe and a
yeah.
wolf, I think, have been publicly posted.
And then there's a lot of like lower CR stuff that you would use for like wild shape in the PHB.
Correct.
But the thing that someone brought up to me, which this was a couple days ago, the first time I talked about Counterspell, is talking about the Lich, because I've never gone up against a Lich,
Mm,
but I think Lich stat blocks have Counterspell, don't they? In
they
in
do.
5e?
Yeah, and they go all the way up
So
to ninth level spells because they're a 20th level caster.
So I'm interested to see how they have limited that, or if the Lich even still has that. because that was something that I'm sorry if you're watching, whoever commented this. I can't remember your name or find the comment in the moment. But they were talking about the action economy, but basing it off of how the liches work in 5e. So until essentially 2025, we don't fully know how well or how not well this game is going to be balanced. We are missing such a huge piece of the puzzle when it comes to that conversation. Um,
Yeah, I'm trying to look to even see if there were updated liches, like because the base lich, the
mhm,
one that everyone is referencing here, is
mhm.
in uh the 2014 version, is written in the old monster manual style where it lists out spell slots. So there were
Yeah.
other liches that were added, but those liches had the number of spells per day. None of them happen, unfortunately, to have counterspell. Now I'm
Mhm.
curious because
Let's
there's
see.
one lich that might have it, and that would
Yeah,
be
at the base one, for those listening at home, it was they have 3 third level spell slots. Um,
now I'm looking at. So okay, so if we're going to talk about probably the lich, right, the man himself,
mhm.
Vecna.
Vecna.
Vecna does not have counterspell as a spellcasting ability. Vecna has a unique reaction called Dread Counterspell, which is not a spell slot. It is a
Okay.
reaction that he utters a word to interrupt a creature. If it's fourth level or lower, it auto fails. If it's higher, they make an intelligence check. And on a success, it happens. But regardless, they take psychic damage if the spell fails. So it's a counterspell with damage.
Okay.
But he doesn't have traditional counterspell that would
Mhm.
fire off a number of times per day. So that might be another thing, and this is something people have talked about too, where like he can counterspell you, but you can't counterspell him, which
Mhm.
people are like, well, you could actually no, I'm sorry. His other spells like dominate monster, dimension
Mhm.
door, invisibility, any of these ones that he can cast a limited number of times per day, you could counterspell. And because they're not using a slot, he expends that use of it. If he was going to cast plane
Mhm.
shift, let's say, on himself to get out, you could counterspell it. If he fails his con save, the usage of that spell is expended. He doesn't have slots to retain to do it again, so that's gone until he takes a long rest.
Mhm.
So it seems that's how the balance of the new version of Counterspell is designed, that you expend usages of things. So if you have, let's say, well, we'll go with our good buddy the Ranger. If you have your number of Hunter's Mark that you can cast for free without
Mhm.
expending a spell slot, say it's 2, and I counterspell your Hunter's Mark, that usage of Hunter's Mark is gone because it wasn't using a spell slot. It's
Yeah.
gone now. So that I think now, having talked it out, it seems that Counterspell, while everybody was basically saying that it's essentially a gutted version of its old self and it's not as good as it was, it seems there may have been, in this particular instance, a little more design knowledge behind it, I think.
Yeah. And I think this version of Counterspell is much kinder to the spellcasters with more limited spell slots.
Mm. Yes,
Because
that's
that
very
was
true.
always because it's always a feels bad when you're playing the warlock or the sorcerer and you're getting real low on those spell slots and you can't recoup them and you have to either decide, do I risk casting counterspell? Well, they had it too. I
Mm-hmm.
guess I'm relying on Eldritch Blast. I think it's a lot kinder to those players, and it almost it definitely changes the strategy
Mm-hmm.
of using
Mm-hmm.
counterspell.
Yeah.
Um, which I'm excited to see it in action, especially with like if we take a look at the Green Dragon's multi attack.
Mm-hmm.
It can make 3 rend attacks, which are its a physical claw attack for those who can't read the tiny print.
Mm.
And or as a multi attack, it can do 2 rend attacks, and it's which one was it?
At will
Uh, a
spells.
use a use of spell casting of its at will spells. And for at will, it has Charm Monster, Detect Magic, and Dissonant Whispers. So you and I were talking about the
Mm-hmm.
scenario of you use a rend attack, you or both rend attacks, you use your at will dissonant whispers, and you force a opportunity attack and force someone to run away from you. Then you
Burning
get
their reaction.
burning their reaction and and you get your opportunity attack, which now you can either shove, grapple, or strike.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're a dragon, you could grapple them, obviously, or if they're fighting somewhere where you can shove them off, you now potentially have the option as a dragon to shove them off or push them closer to an edge so you
Correct.
can shove them off.
And to your point that you had made in our discussion, if the dragon is keen enough to learn who's the spellcaster, they can use
Oh, they're
Dissonant
going
Whispers
first.
to burn their reaction so they can't counterspell.
Yeah.
Or they're burning the counterspell on an at-will spell that the dragon can just keep doing as much as they want. So you're basically, you could eat up that counterspell, and then it's like at one point, are they just going to be like, I'm not going to bother? And then that's when you hit them with the cloud kill or something else to just throw them off, you know?
Yeah, but to like illustrate this, like that's what makes it so important as a player to have counterspell now,
Mm,
because that dissonant whispers attack, you counterspelling that could be what saves your party member
correct.
from getting too close to the edge or getting grappled, and getting out of the way in time instead.
Or,
So I think it's really interesting how strategy is getting fundamentally changed by this
well,
and this stat block. But
correct. But to your point, what you could do is Dissonant Whispers first, and they have to use their reaction to move away from you to walk closer to an edge.
True.
And then you could rend them twice to just push them back twice. So have them walk right up to the edge, and then you're the one to push them over. Or just,
Monsters know what they're doing.
grapple them or fly over the edge and just drop them. That's an option too.
That too. That too. Oh man. What a way to go.
So, but my point is, not trying to say one thing or another, and I think there are some spells we can tell maybe there was some issues on the design side of things, but we only have the one piece of the puzzle, and it seems that with a little bit of digging, maybe there's a reason why some of the changes were made. For example, again, there's no reference to disease, any spells that cure disease. Disease has just been removed. So maybe that means that disease isn't even a thing in the game anymore, right? Diseases, as they were stated previously, were all found in the Dungeon Master's Guide, right next to poisons, like that you would inflict on people. Maybe they've given up on disease as an entirety. Maybe it's all curses now instead of diseases. We don't know. But it's hard to. This just further drives home. If you don't know all of the things, it's hard to cry, balanced or overpowered or underpowered. But I think we fundamentally have figured out why the changes to Counterspell were. So those of you who've brought up, well, the epic moment at the end of Critical Role Campaign 1, if the new version of the Lich has, one teleport per day, and you counterspell that one teleport, its use is expended because it doesn't use a spell slot anymore. So,
yeah.
like our good buddy Vecna here has plane shift once a day for himself. If he was going to shift out to another plane, you counterspell that usage is gone now. The only thing that we haven't addressed, and I just want to get your opinion on this before we bring it to a close, Counterspell no longer has an upcast to allow you to, because it used to be based on the spell level. Right now, it's just you hit him with a con save, which does help, again, to your point of action economy, right? It's a 3rd level Counterspell is as effective as a 9th level Counterspell currently.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts? Do you think it should have some form of an upcast to help you out in some way, or are you good with it just at 3rd level?
I think it's going to depend on what player builds are and also what sort of creature you're using it against, because it's a con save against your spell save DC essentially.
Yeah.
So the higher your spell save DC, better off you are at forcing those in game. I think when it comes to something, I know we've been using the Ancient Green Dragon. It's got a save of +7 on con.
Yeah.
Probably going to be really hard, but if you, I think it's another one of those things where normally con isn't that high of a stat for casters.
Correct. That's true.
So if you're not going against a green dragon, let's step away from the green dragon. If you're going against just an average spellcaster, I think you stand a pretty good chance of negating more spells than when you had to kind of figure out what level they were at.
Mm.
And it also takes away like the mental gymnastics of trying to calculate in the moment, like remembering how to calculate a DC off of whatever. Like it's a number.
It is way
It's already on my
cleaner.
sheet. It's much easier to do. Yeah, that's what, and that's another thing why I like it is it's less mental gymnastics to remember all of the information that I have to remember when I just want to tell a silly little story about fighting dragons with my friends. So I think I again I need to test it in the real world.
Sure.
Hate it if you want, love it if you want. That's fine. Until I test it, I can't really give a definitive. But at first glance, based off of us figuring this out over how many hours have we been on this call now?
Oh God, yeah. Let's not talk about that.
We talked about other things, I promise.
Sure.
But after at least an hour of discussion and then the light bulb moment that has happened, I think I really like how it works
Mm-hmm.
on paper.
Right.
But we'll see when, one of us runs a session for each other and we get mad at each other for counterspelling each other's counterspells one day.
Yeah, and I think that's again,
Yeah.
we'll leave you with that, but that is the healthiest way I think to go
Mhm.
about it is don't knock it till you try it. Give it a fair
Yeah.
shake, right? You could go in hating it, but you're not going to be objective if you do that. If you go in and give it a shot and see, and hey, maybe you like it better, maybe you don't, but at least you now have that information to make an informed decision.
Yeah.
So,
And don't make it off of 5e because this is a very different game,
yeah, this is
in my opinion.
revised 5.5, whatever you want to call it. So,
Revised.
yeah. Thank you, Sarah. All of Sarah's social medias and all the links and all that will be down in the video description below. You should check her out. She's great. We've done a bunch of con-related stuff together, but she has a lot of good content over there as well, and more to come, as I have heard a bunch about it today. So we'll see. But thank you, as always, for this
Yeah, thanks
really
for having me, Ted.
impromptu video. And yeah, we'll see you all next time.
Bye, everybody.